Jake Morrison sat in his office, looking out at the stars through the large window. The space station slowly turned, giving him a view of the planet below. Centauri Prime was a beautiful world with blue oceans and green continents. It was the perfect place for the human embassy. Far from Earth, but close enough to the alien worlds that mattered, Morrison had been the human ambassador for 10 years. He was a tall man with gray hair and kind eyes. People said he was good at his job because he listened more than he talked. The aliens respected him, or at least they seemed to. He had worked hard to build trust between humans and the three big alien powers in the galaxy. The Vorthek Empire controlled the eastern part of the galaxy. They looked like giant lizards with sharp teeth and claws. Their skin was covered in scales that changed color when they were angry. The Vorthak were proud and fierce. They had the biggest military in the galaxy and were not afraid to use it. The Zephyrian Collective ruled the northern sectors. They were insect-like creatures with 4 arms and wings. They lived in huge hives and always moved in groups. The Zephyrians were smart and loved to build things. They had the best technology and the richest trade routes. The Doloran Federation owned the southern worlds. They came from water planets and looked like giant fish that could walk on land. They had gills on their necks and webbed fingers. The Dolorans were careful and patient. They controlled most of the galaxy's shipping. Lanes and banks, humans were the newest members of the galactic community. They had only been part of the Galactic Trade Consortium for 23 years. Earth and its 12 colony worlds seemed tiny compared to the hundreds of planets controlled by the other 3 powers. Most aliens saw humans as weak and unimportant. Morrison had spent years trying to change that view. He attended every meeting, every trade conference, every diplomatic dinner. He learned to speak the alien languages and understand their customs. He made friends with officials from dozens of different species. Slowly, humanity had earned a place at the table. The Treaty of Kepler Station had made it all possible. It was signed on a neutral space station between all 4 powers. The treaty promised peace, fair trade, and respect for each other's territory. Morrison had helped write many of the clauses. He believed the treaty would keep the galaxy safe for generations. On this particular morning, Morrison was meeting with 3 Doloran trade representatives. They were discussing new shipping routes between human and Doloran worlds. The fish-like aliens sat in special water-filled chairs, their gills moving steadily as they breathed. "Your colony worlds produce excellent grain," said Trade Minister Kelp, his voice bubbling slightly. "Our people would pay good prices for regular shipments," Morrison smiled. "I'm sure we can work something out. New Vermont has had a particularly good harvest this year. They could supply your needs for the next 5 years." New Vermont was one of humanity's most important agricultural worlds. It fed 7 other human colonies and had started trading with alien worlds just 2 years ago. The planet was covered in vast farms that grew food for millions of people. As they talked about prices and shipping schedules, Morrison's assistant knocked on the door. Her name was Kate Brown, a young woman who had worked with Morrison for 3 years. She looked worried. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Ambassador," Kate said. "But there's an urgent message from the Colonial Defense Force. They say it's emergency priority." Morrison excused himself and went to the communication room. The message was from Admiral Paul Gray, the commander of human military forces. The Admiral's face on the screen looked grim. "Jake, we have a situation," Gray said without any greeting. "The Vorthak have attacked New Vermont. They hit the planet 2 hours ago with a full battle fleet. The colonists never had a chance." Morrison felt his blood turn cold. "What do you mean attacked? Are you sure it wasn't an accident?" "No accident," Gray replied. "They targeted the farms, the cities, the spaceport, everything. They're claiming the planet belongs to them under some ancient territorial law that's older than the treaty." Morrison stared at the screen. New Vermont had 3 million people. Most of them were farmers and their families. They had no military defenses except for a few patrol ships. "How many casualties?" 3,000 confirmed dead, maybe more. The Vorthak are still bombing. They're not taking prisoners or trying to capture anything? They're just destroying everything they can find. Morrison closed his eyes. He had met many of the colonists on New Vermont. They were good people who had worked hard to build new lives on a frontier world. What about the other colonies? That's the worst part, Gray said. 20 minutes ago, Zephyrian forces hit our mining stations in the outer belt. They're claiming we violated their exclusive mining rights. And just 10 minutes ago, Deloran ships started blockading the shipping lanes between our worlds. Morrison felt sick. This was not random. All three alien powers were attacking human territory at the same time. It was coordinated, planned, and meant to destroy humanity's place in the galaxy. They're working together, Morrison said quietly. This is not about territory or mining rights. They want us gone, Gray nodded. That's what we think too. The question is, what do we do about it? Our fleet is outnumbered 50-1. We can't fight all three of them at once. Morrison thought for a moment. Through the window, he could see Deloran ships moving in formation. They had seemed like friends just an hour ago. Now they were enemies. Send me all the attack footage, Morrison said. Everything you have. And prepare the other colonies for more attacks. This is just the beginning. After ending the call, Morrison sat alone in the communication room. The three Deloran representatives were probably still waiting in his office, talking about grain shipments while their military was strangling human trade routes. Kate knocked again. Sir, the Deloran ministers are asking if you're coming back. They seem concerned about the delay. Morrison almost laughed. Of course they were concerned. They wanted to keep him busy while their forces completed their mission. Tell them I'll be right there. And Kate, send a message to Earth. Tell them to activate Protocol 7. Kate looked confused. Protocol 7, sir? I'm not familiar with that. It's classified, Morrison said. But send it exactly as I said. They'll understand. Morrison returned to his office where the three Delorans were waiting. They looked at him with their large, dark eyes, pretending to be concerned about the delay. I apologize for the interruption, Morrison said calmly. Now, where were we discussing those grain shipments? As they talked, Morrison watched the Deloran ships through his window. He thought about the burning farms on New Vermont and the families who would never see their homes again. The aliens had made a terrible mistake. They thought humanity was weak because they were new to the galaxy. They thought humans would surrender without a fight, but Morrison had not spent 10 years building relationships for nothing. He had learned more than just alien languages and customs. He had learned their secrets, their fears, their weaknesses. He had made friends with species the big powers ignored. He had prepared for this day, hoping it would never come. The treaty was broken. The old rules no longer applied. Now it was time to show the galaxy what humans were really capable of when they were pushed too far. The aliens thought they were destroying humanity's future. Instead, they had just triggered their own downfall. Morrison smiled at the Deloran representatives and continued talking about grain prices. But inside, he was already planning their defeat. 3 days had passed since the attacks began. The galaxy's news networks were full of reports about humanity's crushing defeat. The Vorthak, Zephyrian, and Deloran governments announced that human expansion had finally been stopped. They spoke of ancient rights and necessary corrections to galactic balance. Jake Morrison watched the news reports from his office, but he was not worried. While the alien powers celebrated their victory, he was making very different kinds of calls. These, were not the usual diplomatic conversations. These were the calls he had prepared for during 10 years of careful relationship building. The first call went to Corvan space, deep in the territory once controlled by the Vorthak Empire. The Corvan assembly was made up of 12 species that had all been enslaved by the Vorthak at different times. Some had been free for only 50 years. Others had won their independence over a century ago. But none of them had forgotten what the Vorthak had done to their people. Morrison spoke to Assembly Leader Vex, a being whose people had been forced to work in Vorthak mines for 300 years. Vex had 6 arms and skin like gray stone. His voice always sounded angry, even when he was being friendly. Ambassador Morrison, Vex said through the communication screen, We heard about the attacks on your colonies. The Vorthek have not changed. They still believe they can take what they want from weaker species, Morrison nodded. That's exactly why I'm calling Leader Vex. The Vorthek think they can return to their old ways. They're testing the galaxy to see if anyone will stop them. And... You want us to stop them? Vex asked. His stone-like face showed no emotion, but Morrison could hear the interest in his voice. I want to offer you something you've wanted for generations, Morrison said. Revenge against the Vorthek. Complete revenge. Morrison explained his plan. The Corvan Assembly would attack Vorthek supply lines and military bases throughout their territory. In return, humanity would provide them with captured Vorthek technology and weapons. The Corvans would finally have the tools they needed to make their former masters pay. Vex was quiet for a long time. Then he smiled, showing teeth like broken glass. My people have waited over 3 centuries for this chance. We accept your offer, Ambassador. The Vorthek will learn that some crimes are never forgotten. The second call went to the Freelance Miners Guild, a group of independent workers who operated throughout Zephyrian space. The guild was made up of hundreds of different species who had one thing in common. They hated paying taxes to the Zephyrian collective. Morrison spoke to Guildmaster Ben Cole, a human who had left Earth 30 years ago to make his fortune in the asteroid belts. Cole was a rough man with scarred hands and a permanent scowl. He had built the guild into a powerful organization that the Zephyrians could not control. Jake, I heard about what happened to your people, Cole said. Those bug-faced tyrants finally showed their true colors. What do you need from us? Morrison smiled. Cole was always direct. I need eyes and ears throughout Zephyrian space. Your miners work everywhere the collective has interests. They see everything, know every shipping route, every military base, every weak point. And in return? Cole asked. In return, the Freelance Miners Guild becomes the official mining authority for all human space. No more taxes to the Zephyrians, no more interference from their bureaucrats. Complete independence, Cole grinned. Now you're talking my language. The guild has been waiting for a chance to stick it to those insects. You'll have everything you need within 6 hours. The third call was the most dangerous. Morrison contacted the Deloran Liberation Front, a rebel group fighting against their own government. The front was led by Commander Sarah Quinn, a Deloran who had been cast out of her society for questioning the Federation's expansion policies. Quinn appeared on the screen with her blue-green skin and the scars that marked her as a rebel, talking. To her was treason in Deloran space, but Morrison had been secretly supporting the Liberation Front for years. Ambassador Morrison, Quinn said, I'm sorry about your colonies. My people's government has betrayed everything we once believed in. They have become as ruthless as the species they claim to oppose. Morrison leaned forward. Sarah, this is your chance. While your government is distracted with attacking humans, you can strike at their core systems. I can provide you with intelligence about Federation fleet movements and supply lines. Quinn's eyes widened. How could you possibly have such information? Morrison smiled. I've been preparing for this day for a very long time. The question is, are you ready to finally free your people from the oligarchs who rule them? Quinn was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded. The Liberation Front has been ready for years. We just needed the right moment. Send us what you have. Today, the Federation learns that their own children will no longer tolerate their oppression. After the calls were finished, Morrison met with Dr. Lisa Parker, humanity's chief scientist studying alien biology. Parker was a small woman with bright eyes and an incredibly sharp mind. She had arrived at the station just hours after the attacks began, carrying classified research files. Jake, I brought everything we have, Parker said as she set down a heavy case. 20 years of biological research on every major species in the galaxy. The medical cooperation programs gave us access to genetic samples, brain scans, nervous system studies. We know exactly how their bodies work. Morrison opened the case and saw hundreds of data chips. What exactly are you telling me, Lisa? Parker pulled out one of the chips. I'm telling you that we found weaknesses in all 3 species. Specific. The electromagnetic frequencies that disrupt Vorthek motor functions, sound patterns that cause temporary paralysis in Zephyrians, light wavelengths that overload Deloran nervous systems. Morrison stared at her. You're talking about weapons. I'm talking about non-lethal weapons, Parker corrected. We can disable their forces without killing them. It's more humane than what they did to our colonists. Morrison took the chip. How long to weaponize this research? The prototypes are already being tested, Parker said. We should have working systems within 48 hours. The next person to arrive was Captain Roy Stevens, commander of the UES Defiance. Stevens was a career military officer who had fought in the border wars before joining the human space Navy. He was a big man with steady hands and the kind of calm confidence that made other people want to follow him. Ambassador, I've positioned my battle group near the Nexus Gate as ordered, Stevens reported. The aliens think we're conducting routine patrols. They have no idea we're in position to control the main hyperspace junction, Morrison nodded. The Nexus Gate was the most important location in the galaxy. It was the central hub that connected all the major star systems. Ships traveling between different sectors had to pass through the gate, control it, and you could control all movement in the galaxy. How many ships do you have? Morrison asked. 3 dreadnoughts, 5 cruisers, and 12 destroyers, Stevens replied. Not enough to fight the combined alien fleets, but enough to hold the gate if we get support. Morrison smiled. You'll get support? More than you expect. The final person to arrive was Commander Nina Bell, the head of Human Intelligence Operations. Bell was a woman who seemed to blend into the background, but Morrison knew she was one of the most dangerous people in the galaxy. Her network of spies and informants reached into every alien government and military command. Nina, please tell me you have good news, Morrison said. Bell smiled for the first time in days. I have excellent news. Our people have been in place for years. We have agents in the Vorthak High Command, the Zephyrian Collective Council, and the Deloran Federation Parliament. We know their battle plans before their own generals do. Morrison felt a surge of hope. What else? We have sympathizers in 57 different species throughout the galaxy. Most of them are minor powers that the Big Three ignore or oppress. They're all willing to help if we can prove that humanity offers them something better. Bell handed Morrison a data pad. This is the full list of our assets and allies. We've been building this network for 10 years, waiting for the right moment to use it. Morrison looked at the list. It was longer than he had dared to hope. The aliens think they're fighting 12 human colonies. They have no idea they're about to face half the galaxy. Bell nodded. They've spent so long looking down on smaller species that they forgot those species might work together. They're about to learn that unity is more powerful than size. Morrison stood up and walked to the window. Outside, he could see ships from many different species docking at the station. To any observer, it looked like normal diplomatic traffic. But Morrison knew better. These ships carried representatives from dozens of worlds, all coming to join humanity's cause. The aliens had made a fatal mistake. They thought destroying human colonies would end humanity's influence in the galaxy. Instead, it had triggered the activation of the largest alliance in galactic history. Species that had never worked together before were now united by a common enemy and a common hope. Morrison smiled as he watched another ship dock. The galaxy was about to change forever, and the species that had started this war would be the ones to lose it. The quiet gathering was complete. Now it was time to show the galaxy what real power looked like. 6 days after the attacks began, Jake Morrison sent a message to the Galactic Trade Consortium headquarters on Harmony Point. The message was simple and formal. He requested an emergency meeting with the Governing Council to discuss the current crisis in human space. The 3 alien leaders were surprised but pleased by the request. They had expected humanity to surrender within days of the attacks. This meeting would be the perfect opportunity to accept humanity's formal defeat and divide up the human colonies among themselves. Chancellor Krex of the Vorthak Empire was the first to agree to the meeting. He was a massive lizard-like creature, with scales that glowed red when he was excited. Krex had led the Vorthic military for over 20 years and had personally ordered the attack on New Vermont. He looked forward to seeing the human ambassador beg for mercy. Hive Queen Zara of the Zephyrian Collective was equally eager to attend. She was the most intelligent of the insect-like Zephyrians, with 4 arms that moved constantly as she thought. Zara had planned the attacks on the human mining stations and wanted to claim the mineral rights for her people. She expected Morrison to offer complete surrender in exchange for allowing some humans to survive. Prime Minister Glex of the Deloran Federation was the most cautious of the 3 leaders. He was an old fish-like creature with gray skin and tired eyes. Glex had lived through many wars and knew that victory was never as simple as it appeared. Still, he agreed to the meeting. The human fleet was scattered and their colonies were defenseless. What threat could one diplomat possibly pose? Morrison arrived at Harmony Point in a small diplomatic shuttle. He brought only 3 assistants. With him, Kate Brown, Dr. Lisa Parker, and a military aide named Lieutenant Dan Foster. The alien leaders had expected a larger delegation, perhaps with military officers ready to negotiate surrender terms. The meeting was held in the Grand Council Chamber, a vast dome-shaped room that could hold representatives from hundreds of species. The 3 alien leaders sat at the center in large chairs designed for their different body types. Around them were hundreds of empty seats, showing how many species had been pushed out of galactic politics by the big 3 powers. Morrison walked slowly to the center of the chamber, carrying a single black briefcase. His assistants remained near the entrance, standing quietly as observers. The chamber was filled with alien officials, reporters, and military officers who had come to witness humanity's surrender. Chancellor Krex spoke first, his voice booming through the chamber. Ambassador Morrison, we are pleased that you have come to discuss the current situation. We trust you understand that the attacks on human territory were necessary to correct violations of ancient territorial agreements. Morrison stood calmly at the central podium, looking up at the 3 alien leaders. He seemed very small compared to their imposing forms, but his voice was steady and clear. Honored leaders, I have indeed come to discuss the current situation. But I think there has been a misunderstanding about the nature of this meeting. Hive Queen. Zara's 4 arms gestured dismissively. There's no misunderstanding, human. Your species has overextended itself in the galaxy. The recent military actions were simply corrections to restore proper order. Morrison smiled slightly. I see. And this proper order involves coordinated attacks on civilian populations, the destruction of agricultural facilities that feed millions, and the blockade of humanitarian supply routes? Prime Minister Glex leaned forward in his water-filled chair. The Galactic Trade Consortium has determined that human expansion threatened the stability of established trade relationships. The actions taken were regrettable but necessary. Morrison nodded slowly. I understand your position. Now, let me explain mine. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a datapad. 23 years ago, we signed the Treaty of Kepler Station. All 4 of our governments agreed to respect each other's territorial rights, maintain fair trade practices, and resolve disputes through peaceful negotiation. Chancellor Krex's scales began to glow brighter. The treaty has been superseded by more pressing concerns. Your species, Morrison held up his hand. Please, Chancellor, let me finish. You see, I have here documented evidence of systematic treaty violations by all 3 of your governments. These violations began 15 years ago and have continued until the present day. The alien leaders exchanged glances. Hive Queen Zara's mandibles clicked nervously. What kind of evidence? Morrison touched the datapad in the chamber's main. Display screen activated. It showed shipping records, communication intercepts, and financial transactions. Industrial espionage against human companies. Unauthorized mining operations in human territory. The theft of agricultural research from our colonies. And most importantly, detailed plans for the invasion you recently executed. Prime Minister. Glex's gills fluttered rapidly. Where could you have obtained such information? From your own government databases, Morrison replied calmly. It's amazing what people will tell you when they trust you. I've spent 10 years building relationships throughout the galaxy. Some of those relationships were with people inside your own governments. The display showed more evidence. Secret military communications, financial records showing payments to saboteurs, and video footage of alien ships in human space months before the attacks. The assembled officials began murmuring among themselves. Chancellor Krex stood up, his massive form towering over the chamber. Even if this evidence is real, it changes nothing. Your species lacks the military power to challenge our alliance. You are in no position to make demands. Morrison's smile grew wider. That brings me to why I'm really here. This is not a surrender negotiation. This is an ultimatum. The chamber fell silent. The three alien leaders stared down at the human ambassador in disbelief. Hive Queen Zara was the first to speak. Did you say ultimatum? Morrison nodded. You have 72 hours to withdraw all military forces from human space. You will provide full compensation for the damage you have caused to our colonies. You will submit to independent arbitration of all territorial disputes. And you will accept the dissolution of the current Galactic Trade Consortium in favor of a new organization based on true equality. The silence in the chamber was broken by alien laughter. Chancellor Krex's booming voice echoed off the dome. And what will you do if we refuse, Ambassador? Your pathetic fleet cannot challenge our combined might. Your colonies are defenseless. Your people are scattered across a dozen worlds with no hope of unified resistance. Morrison waited for the laughter to die down. Then he activated the chamber's display again. This time it showed real-time footage from across the galaxy. Corvan liberation fleets were attacking Vorthok supply bases. Explosions lit up the darkness of space as military installations were destroyed. While you have been celebrating your victory over defenseless colonists, we have been organizing your real enemies, Morrison explained. The Corvan Assembly has been waiting 3 centuries for revenge against the Vorthok. Today, they got their chance. The display shifted to show Zephyrian mining operations under attack. Freelance miners' guild ships were systematically destroying collective facilities throughout the northern sectors. Ben Cole's voice came through the speakers. This is for 30 years of unfair taxation and bureaucratic oppression. Hive Queen Zara's wings began to buzz frantically. How is this possible? The guild has never been organized enough for military action. Morrison looked up at her. They weren't organized before. But unity has a way of developing when people are pushed too far. The guild now has over 10,000 ships working together. They know every weakness in your territory because they've been forced to work there for decades. The display showed the third part of Morrison's plan. Doloran rebel fleets were engaging Federation forces in their own star systems. Commander Sarah Quinn's face appeared on the screen as she spoke to her followers. Today we free ourselves from the oligarchs who have ruled us for too long. Today we fight for the future our children deserve. Prime Minister Glex's skin turned a pale gray. The Liberation Front was scattered and weak. They could never threaten our core systems. Morrison touched the datapad again. They were scattered because they lacked coordination and resources. We provided both. They were weak because they fought alone. Now they fight as part of something much larger. The display showed the scope of the rebellion. Dozens of star systems were in open revolt against the 3 major powers. Species that had been oppressed for generations were finally fighting back. Mining colonies, agricultural worlds, and trade stations were all declaring independence. Chancellor Krex's voice was no longer booming. This is impossible. These species hate each other. They would never work together? Morrison shook his head. They don't hate each other. They hate you. You've spent so long dividing them that you forgot they all have the same enemy. Today they remembered? The display showed one final image that made all 3 alien leaders go silent. Human naval forces were emerging from hyperspace at strategic points throughout the galaxy. The ships were not alone. They were accompanied by vessels from dozens of different species, all flying the same flag. You see, Morrison continued, humanity was never just 12 colony worlds. We were the center of a growing alliance of species who believed in equality and justice. The 72 hours that followed Morrison's ultimatum were the longest in galactic history. The three alien leaders returned to their homeworlds expecting to rally their forces and crush the rebellions. Instead, they found chaos waiting for them. Chancellor Krex arrived at the Vorthak capital to discover that half his military bases were under attack. The Corvan assembly had struck with precision and fury, targeting supply depots, communication centers, and weapons factories. Worse, they were using advanced human technology that made their old mining equipment into powerful weapons. Assembly leader Vex personally led the attack on the main Vorthak shipyard. His people had built those same ships as slaves for 3 centuries. Now they knew exactly how to destroy them. Vex's stone-like face showed fierce joy as he watched Vorthak dreadnoughts explode in the darkness of space. For 300 years you made us build your war machines, Vex broadcast to the Vorthak defenders. Today we show you how well we learned to destroy them. The Corvan forces were not just attacking randomly. They had detailed intelligence about every Vorthak installation provided by Commander Nina Bell's spy network. They knew which bases were lightly defended, which supply lines were critical, and which commanders could be trusted to panic under pressure. Hive Queen Zara faced an even worse situation. The Freelance Miners Guild had turned their industrial equipment into weapons of war. Mining lasers designed to cut through asteroids were now slicing through Zephyrian ships. Cargo haulers had been converted into troop transports. Construction robots were being used to build fortifications on captured worlds. Ben Cole commanded the guild fleet from his modified mining barge. He had waited 30 years for this moment, watching the Zephyrians grow rich while independent miners struggled to survive. Now he had 10,000 ships under his command and a lifetime of anger to fuel his attacks. Attention Zephyrian Collective, Cole broadcast on all frequencies. You've taxed us, regulated us, and treated us like criminals for decades. Today, the independent miners take back what's ours. The Guild's knowledge of Zephyrian space was complete. They knew every trade route, every mining operation, every hidden facility. They had worked in those places for years, always watched but never trusted. Now their intimate knowledge of Zephyrian territory became their greatest weapon. Prime Minister Glex had perhaps the worst shock of all. The Deloran Liberation Front had not only grown in size but had gained support from within the Federation government itself. Entire fleet commanders were defecting to join Commander Sarah Quinn's rebellion. Planets that had been loyal for generations were declaring independence. Quinn's rebel fleet moved through Deloran space like they owned it. They did own it, in many ways. These were Deloran ships crewed by Deloran personnel who were tired of their government's corruption and endless expansion. They knew every defense code, every patrol schedule, every weakness in Federation security. Citizens of the Federation, Quinn announced from her captured flagship, we are not your enemies. We are your children, fighting for the future you promised but never delivered. Join us, and together we will build something better. But the real surprise came when the three alien leaders tried to coordinate their response. Their communication networks were filled with false signals. Their intelligence reports were contradicted by reality, and their military commanders were receiving orders that no one had given. Commander Nina Bell's intelligence network had been more thorough than anyone imagined. Human agents had infiltrated not just alien governments but their military commands, their communication systems, and their strategic planning centers. Every order the alien leaders gave was known to their enemies before it reached their own forces. Dr. Lisa Parker's biological weapons proved devastatingly effective. The first Vorthak units to face human forces found themselves unable to move, as electromagnetic pulses disrupted their nervous systems. The weapons did not kill, but they left entire battalions helpless and confused. Zephyrian pilots discovered that certain sound frequencies broadcast from human ships caused temporary paralysis. Their forearms would lock up, their wings would stop moving, and they would drift helplessly through space until the effect wore off hours later. The Loran naval forces found that specific light patterns from human vessels caused sensory overload. Their large eyes, designed for underwater vision, could not handle the carefully calibrated wavelengths that Dr. Parker's team had developed. "We're not trying to exterminate them," Parker explained to Morrison over a secure communication link. "We're just making it impossible for them to fight effectively. It's more humane than what they did to our colonists." Captain Roy Stevens had positioned his fleet perfectly. When the alien powers tried to move reinforcements between their territories, they found the Nexus Gate blocked by human ships. But Stevens was not alone. His 3 dreadnoughts had been joined by ships from 40 different species, all working together under human coordination. "This is Captain Stevens of the Terran Defense Force," he broadcast to approaching alien fleets. "The Nexus Gate is now under Alliance control. All vessels requesting passage must submit to inspection and agree to ceasefire terms." The alien commanders had never seen anything like it. Species that had barely been able to communicate with each other were now fighting as a unified force. Former enemies were sharing intelligence, resources, and tactical support. The humans had somehow created unity from chaos. Stevens' mixed fleet proved that Morrison's alliance was more than just a political arrangement. When Vorthek forces tried to force their way through the gate, they were met by coordinated fire from human, Corvin, and even Deloran rebel ships. The battle was brief and decisive. The Vorthak retreated with heavy losses. On the second day, Morrison received reports that made him smile. Minor species throughout the galaxy were joining the rebellion. The Helios traders, the crystal miners of Kepler, the nomad fleets of the Outer Rim, and dozens of others were all declaring for the Alliance. These were species that the major powers had ignored or exploited for generations. They had small fleets and limited resources, but they knew the galaxy better than anyone. They operated in places the big powers never bothered to patrol. They carried news and supplies to worlds that never appeared on official maps. "Ambassador Morrison," reported Kate Brown, reading from the latest intelligence summary. "We now have confirmed support from 73 different species. That represents over 400 star systems and more than 1,500 inhabited worlds." Morrison nodded. "And the major powers?" "Their territory is shrinking by the hour," Kate replied. "The Vorthek have lost control of 6 major systems. The Zephyrians have abandoned their outer mining operations. The Delorans are fighting civil war in their own core worlds." But Morrison's masterstroke was yet to be revealed. As the chaos spread through alien territory, human ships began appearing in unexpected places. Not just military vessels, but cargo ships, passenger liners, and industrial transports, all carrying the same flag and broadcasting the same message. "This is the Terran Alliance," came the standard broadcast. "We are here to provide humanitarian aid to all species affected by the current conflict. Medical supplies, food, and refugee transport are available to anyone who needs them." The alien populations had never seen anything like it. In the middle of a war, humans were offering help to their enemies' civilians. Human medical ships were treating wounded Vorthak soldiers. Human cargo vessels were delivering food to Zephyrian worlds cut off by the fighting. Human passenger ships were evacuating Deloran refugees from combat zones. Morrison had realized something that the alien leaders had missed. This was not just a military conflict. It was a battle for the hearts and minds of the entire galaxy. By showing mercy to their enemies' people, humans were proving that their way was better than the old system of oppression and fear. Reports began coming in from alien worlds where human aid workers were being welcomed by local populations. Vorthak farmers were thanking human medics for treating their children. Zephyrian workers were helping human engineers repair damaged infrastructure. Deloran refugees were volunteering to serve on human ships. By the third day, the 3 alien leaders were facing complete collapse. Their military forces were scattered and demoralized. Their populations were questioning why they were fighting humans who seemed more interested in helping than conquering. Their allies were abandoning them to join the growing alliance. "Chancellor," Krex tried to rally his remaining forces by appealing to Vorthek pride. But his own generals were asking why they were fighting a war that seemed to benefit no one. Some of his ships had already stopped fighting and were requesting alliance protection for their crews. Hive Queen Zara attempted to maintain collective unity through traditional hive mind techniques. But too many of her people had been exposed to the idea that different species could work together as equals. The rigid hierarchy that held Zephyrian society together was beginning to crack. Prime Minister Glex watched his Federation tear itself apart as more worlds joined the rebellion. Each day, even his own parliament was calling for peace negotiations. The war had lasted only 3 days, but it felt like the end of everything he had worked to build. Morrison sat in his office, watching the reports flow in from across the galaxy. 71 hours after Morrison's ultimatum, the 3 alien leaders sent a desperate message to Harmony Point. They were ready to negotiate. The galaxy-wide rebellion had spread too far and too fast for them to control. Their own people were abandoning them to join the human-led alliance. Morrison agreed to meet them in the same chamber where he had delivered his ultimatum. But this time, the vast room was filled with representatives from over 100 different species. The empty seats that had once shown alien dominance were now occupied by beings who had never before had a voice in galactic politics. Chancellor Krex entered the chamber looking defeated. His red scales had faded to a dull brown, and he moved slowly like an old lizard. Half of his military had defected to the Alliance, and the Corvin Assembly controlled most of his former territory. The proud Vorthek Empire was crumbling from within. Hive Queen Zara came next, her forearms hanging limply at her sides. The Zephyrian collective was in chaos as individual hives declared independence and joined the growing alliance. Her people had discovered that they could think for themselves without the rigid hierarchy that had controlled them for centuries. Prime Minister Glex was the last to arrive, his gills moving weakly as he struggled with the station's atmosphere. The Deloran Federation had split in half, with Commander Sarah Quinn's rebels controlling the most important systems. Even his own parliament was calling for his resignation. Morrison stood at the center podium, no longer looking small compared to the alien leaders. Around him sat representatives of species that had been ignored for generations. The Helios traders, the crystal miners, the nomad fleets, and dozens of others who had finally found their voice. Honored delegates, Morrison began, addressing the entire assembly rather than just the 3 former powers. We are gathered here to establish a new order for our galaxy. The old system of domination and oppression has failed. Today we build something better. Chancellor Krex tried to maintain some dignity. What are your terms, Ambassador Morrison? What do you want from us? Morrison looked up at him with calm eyes. I want justice, Chancellor. Justice for the colonists you murdered, justice for the species you enslaved, justice for everyone who suffered under your rule. Morrison activated the chamber's display, showing images of the destroyed human colonies. The burned farms and shattered cities were a reminder of why they were all here. But then the display showed something else, human aid workers rebuilding. Those same colonies working alongside volunteers from across the galaxy. The Galactic Trade Consortium is officially dissolved, Morrison announced. In its place, we establish the Terran Galactic Alliance, based on the principles of equality, justice, and mutual respect. Every species will have an equal voice, regardless of their size or military power. Hive Queen Zara's mandibles clicked nervously. And what happens to us? What happens to our people? Morrison's expression softened slightly. Your people will be welcomed into the alliance as equals, just like everyone else. But your governments will face trial for war crimes. The galaxy deserves to know the truth about what you've done. The terms Morrison outlined were harsh but fair. The 3 former powers would pay massive reparations to repair the damage they had caused. Their military forces would be reduced and placed under alliance oversight. Their leaders would stand trial before an international court, made up of judges from species they had oppressed, but Morrison also offered hope. The Vorthek people would be free to choose their own government for the first time in centuries. The Zephyrian hives could develop their own cultures without central control. The Deloran worlds could decide their own futures without Federation interference. Captain Roy Stevens was appointed as the Supreme Commander of Alliance Defense Forces. His mixed fleet of human and alien ships would patrol the galaxy, ensuring that no species could again dominate others through military force. Stevens had proven that different species could fight together as one. Dr. Lisa Parker became the head of the Interspecies Medical Council. Her research into alien biology would be used to heal rather than harm. Her teams would work to cure diseases, extend lifespans, and improve the quality of life for all species in the galaxy. The weapons she had developed would be destroyed. Commander Nina Bell took charge of the Intelligence Coordination Bureau. Her vast network of agents and informants would be used to prevent conflicts before they started. No species would be able to plan secret attacks or build hidden weapons. Transparency would replace the suspicion that had driven the galaxy to war. Ben Cole of the Freelance Miners Guild became the Director of Resource Management. His people knew the galaxy's mineral wealth better than anyone. Under his leadership, resources would be shared fairly among all Alliance members. No longer would major powers hoard wealth while smaller species struggled. Assembly Leader Vex was named the Justice Coordinator for War Crimes Tribunals. His people had suffered under Vorthak rule for 3 centuries. Now they would ensure that justice was served for all victims of oppression. The trials would be fair but thorough. Commander Sarah Quinn became the Planetary Liberation Coordinator. Her job was to help worlds that wanted to join the Alliance but were still controlled by hostile governments. Her experience fighting for Deloran freedom would help other species achieve their own independence. Morrison himself was elected as the first Secretary General of the Alliance. Representatives from over 100 species voted for him unanimously. They remembered how he had united them against impossible odds and trusted him to lead them into a better future. The transformation was remarkable. Within months, the galaxy looked completely different. The human colonies that had been attacked were rebuilt and stronger than ever. New Vermont became a center of agricultural research, teaching sustainable farming to species from across the galaxy. Trade routes that had been controlled by the major powers were open to everyone. Small species that had never been able to compete with the big 3 suddenly found new markets for their goods. The nomad fleets became the galaxy's most trusted carriers, moving goods and people between worlds with efficiency and honesty. The Nexus Gate became the symbol of the new order. Instead of being controlled by military force, it was managed by a joint committee representing all Alliance members. Ships from any species could pass through freely, promoting trade and cultural exchange. Educational exchange programs were established throughout the galaxy. Young beings from different species studied together, learning to understand and respect each other's cultures. The prejudices that had divided the galaxy for millennia began to fade as people worked together toward common goals. Morrison's greatest achievement was the Diplomatic Corps' Academy on Centauri Prime. Representatives from every species came to learn the art of peaceful negotiation. The Academy taught that conflicts could be resolved through understanding rather than violence. The Academy's motto was carved above its entrance in 100 different languages: unity through understanding. Students learned not just how to negotiate, but how to see the galaxy through the eyes of other species. They studied the mistakes of the past to ensure they were never repeated. The trials of the former alien leaders were broadcast throughout the galaxy. Chancellor Krex, Hive Queen Zara, and Prime Minister Glex faced justice for their crimes. But the trials were not about revenge. They were about truth, reconciliation, and ensuring that future generations understood the cost of oppression. Many of the defendants expressed genuine remorse for their actions. Some even became advocates for the new alliance, using their experiences to warn others about the dangers of unchecked power. The galaxy learned that redemption was possible even for those who had fallen the furthest. 5 years after the war, Morrison stood in his office looking out at the same stars he had watched during the crisis, but everything had changed. The space around Centauri Prime was filled with ships from dozens of different species, All working together in peace. Kate Brown, now his chief of staff, entered with the daily reports. Sir, we have 3 new species. Requesting alliance membership: the Void Walkers from the Galactic Rim, the Deep Miners from the Core Worlds, and the Sky Dancers from the Upper Spiral Arm. Morrison smiled. Approved. Schedule welcome ceremonies for all 3? And Kate, make sure they understand that membership means responsibility. We're not just joining them to our alliance. We're making them part of our family. Morrison had learned that the greatest victory was not defeating your enemies, but turning them into friends. The galaxy was no longer divided by fear and hatred. It was united by hope and shared purpose. The species that had once dismissed humanity as weak newcomers now looked to humans for leadership and guidance. But Morrison had made sure that leadership was always shared. The alliance belonged to everyone, not just to those who had created it. As he watched another mixed cruise ship dock at the station, Morrison remembered the burning colonies that had started this journey. Those colonists had not died in vain. Their sacrifice had become the foundation of a better galaxy, where such tragedies could never happen again. The treaty breakers had become the treaty makers' greatest success story. They had learned that true strength came not from dominating others, but from lifting them up.